morning and welcome to Chicago. We're so excited to have you here, and unless you are tempted to not pay close attention to Randy's antitrust admonition, I would just remind you that our first keynote speaker is a former U.S. attorney, so take it seriously. But no, we are delighted to have you here, and I want to begin by thanking you for your continued support of and engagement with PCI. But at this particular moment, I also want to thank you for your incredible commitment to the individuals and businesses and families and communities you serve, especially after natural disasters strike. This hurricane season has obviously been one for the record books. It's been devastating, and it's not over. And that's not to mention the wildfires that have ravaged the western states this year. And PCI and I have been working with many of you over the last several weeks and months, engaging with state and federal policymakers to facilitate the recovery process with your policyholders and troubleshoot issues that you've had as your claims adjusters have tried to get into these areas as soon as possible after the storms dissipate. We've also been engaging the media to highlight your very good work telling the great story of what you're doing out there in Texas and Florida and in the Pacific Northwest. And so thank you for partnering with us, for all you've done and all you will continue to do for these impacted communities. As mentioned earlier, the theme of this year's meeting is the future of insurance. We know that our future will look much different than our past. The risk profile of the economy will change, and we'll have to adapt with it. We've done it in the past, and now as an industry, we're going to need to do it once again. Our program this week is designed to help executives manage the business operation and consumer anxieties associated with change while looking to embrace and harness new opportunities for the benefit of the property casualty insurance marketplace and the consumers who rely upon us. Our goal is to anticipate and facilitate innovation through our role in helping consumers and businesses manage the risks of the future. You heard me say it in the video earlier, but we are living in a time of unprecedented change, both in terms of the nature and pace of the change. Innovation and disruption are fundamentally impacting the very fabric of modern American society. Change comes from many sources and from many political, social, and demographic forces. And change is supercharged by new technology. To effectively lead the industry during these times, we need to understand how these forces are shaping the business operating environment. And as part of that understanding, we cannot underestimate the lasting impact of the financial crisis that still reverberates through society a decade later. This effect is amplified by global supply chains and technology. Now, I think most of us in this room and most economists agree that the new technology and a more globally integrated economy have brought tremendous growth opportunities both for the U.S. as well as for the world. But at the micro level, it has caused significant disruptions to certain industries, regions, and demographic sectors. I dealt with that extensively in my previous role at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where we were heavily engaged in the steel industry and the steel regions and the textile regions that were significantly impacted and whose workers were significantly impacted by changing trade patterns and technology. And all of that dislocation at the micro level for certain industries and regions and demographic groups feeds into today's unrest and disruption, the likes of which we have not seen since the 1930s. And all of this has fed into a rising tide of nationalism and populism, not just here in the U.S., but around the world. For example, the Brexit vote, and most recently, Catalonia's vote to separate from Spain. And I think most political analysts agree it was these forces that were driving voter response in the national election of November 2016. Public relations giant Richard Edelman brings it all together with one simple equation: a lack of belief in system, plus economic and societal fears, plus loss of trust in institutions, equals populism. In short, this populism can be summarized as people taking authority back from institutions they no longer have faith in. These trends mean that financial services industries, including the insurance sector, will likely face continued scrutiny and fiery rhetoric about income equality, affordability of products, as well as calls for increased price controls. And we need to brace ourselves for politics to trump good public policy on the issues that matter most. Now, we can either just ignore these trends and dismiss these concerns, which many elected leaders of both political parties and some business leaders are tempted to do, or we can take seriously that during times like these, there are real and legitimate concerns that people have about societies and institutions' ability to adapt, and take that into account as we manage the pace of change. While it's certainly easy to be consumed with all the social disruption and division we see, I think it's important to remember that this is not the first time in history that we've been through this. Sometimes we've adapted well, leading to broad-based economic growth and opportunity, such as in the post-World War II era, an era of unprecedented technological deployment in society and income growth. At other times, we have come dangerously close to fragmenting as a society. I think of the late 19th century and the transition from an agrarian to an industrial economy, and the early 20th century in the years after the Great Depression. In both of those periods, we saw rising hostility toward immigrants and a growth in isolationism and populism. Our conference is about the insurance industry's critical role in navigating risk and seizing opportunities. And let me suggest two ways that I think we can help set a positive trajectory for change. Just some things to think about. First, in this era of sweeping change, I would suggest that we must always weigh the benefit of innovation and technological advancements in the light of the potential societal disruption caused by that deployment. Disruption can be, but is not inevitably, an unmitigated blessing. And while I am deeply concerned about a 21st century reincarnation of the 19th century's Know-Nothing Party, I do think a legitimate question in public policy should be, is the advancement worth its potential consequences? And how do we deal with the societal implications of the pace of change? Many of the things that when I talk about the pace of change, in previous eras, the pace of change was generational in nature. Now it's happening in real time. Innovation can be, but is not inevitably, a positive for society. For example, in his book, A Free People's Suicide, English author and social critic Os Guinness noted, and I quote, "No financial instrument was more innovative and lucrative than the packaging of subprime mortgages and credit default swaps. But no one thought to ask, whether the innovations were healthy or toxic. Just imagine if someone had, and the different course that history might have taken. At the end of the day, we as business leaders need to make informed and balanced decisions about how we deploy all the new tools and technology available to us. If we don't, we may spur a terrible backlash against the industry. Second, harnessing change and disruption for the better also means being students and stewards of history and properly incorporating the lessons from our past into the future. Now, properly incorporating, that's not something that many politicians understand. Typically, they see the choice as binary. You either cling to the past or you stoke anxiety about the future. Or you reject it and charge headlong into the future. Well, I would suggest that's a false choice. Change is not a rejection of history, it's an incorporation of it. Our past is the foundation we build on. We build, we advance. We don't throw away all that we've learned from the past. Again, I'm intrigued by Os Guinness, who said, "Times may change, and with them kingdoms and empires, but human nature stays the same. So the past is the enduring guide to the present." Our industry is no stranger to change, and change is cojoined with risk. At the core of what's made the property casualty industry an integral part of the national and global economy is our ability to understand evolving risk, price risk, and thus enable innovators to take the risk that advance society. And clearly, we've made strides over the centuries, and our industry has been a major force of stability through all the changes that have taken place. Take, for example, the advent of fire insurance. That was the result of the Great London Fire of 1666. And today, we're writing new lines of private insurance coverage to meet the rapidly changing and growing market demands. Society looks different, and so do we. We're providing the solutions to help our nation manage the major challenges facing the nation. We help businesses and communities protect themselves financially from cyber threats and terrorist threats. We're developing better data analytics to improve the insurance marketplace. We're developing products for the sharing economy and the future of autonomous vehicles. We're expanding into the flood insurance marketplace to help expand consumer options and coverage. And insurtech companies are infusing the industry with new ideas while helping to attract new talent to the sector. The bottom line is we live in an era of unparalleled innovation, disruption, and promise. Our role as an industry is to respond with creativity and innovation on our own part to help make the promise a reality, because the one constant in every age of innovation is risk. Risk that must be understood, accurately priced, and insured. For without us and the role the P&C industry plays, innovation will come to a screeching halt. And on that note, I'll also remind you where we are meeting this week and how this city has adapted over the 240 years since trader Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable settled here. The city had its own great fire in 1871, and just 22 years later had rebuilt itself into the host of the 1893 World's Fair. This city was and is home to millions of immigrants of all skill levels. The city built the nation's first skyscraper. It's the starting point of Route 66, and its residents even reversed the flow of its river in order to stem the tide of waterborne illness. In 1883, Mark Twain said, "It's hopeless for the occasional visitor to try to keep up with Chicago. She outgrows his prophecies faster than he can make them." So this week, it's only appropriate that we gather in Chicago as we embrace challenges, innovation, and change, and new frontiers for the industry. As we examine emerging risk and disruptions, May we instead adjust our lens to see the limitless opportunities ahead for our country, our customers, and our companies, thanks to the presence and leadership of all of the executives of the property casualty industry who are gathered here. Thank you again very much for being here this week.